I know that you were hoping to get away from triangles, so you will get a tiny bit of a reprieve before we jump right back into triangles. This is the beginning to Unit 5, which is going to deal with particularly right triangles. But something we need to cover, make sure that you know, is how to do squares and square roots. So I did forget to bring my calculator home, so I am going to be using my phone. It kind of starts like this, but then if you turn it sideways, it does actually give you both the squared, which is right here, and the square root, which is right here. So that's what we'll be using. If you're in my classroom, you should have a calculator. So the first thing that you need to know is the difference between a squared and a square root. Squared usually is a small exponent, x squared, and it means that you multiply a number times itself. So in other words, if I say 8 squared, I don't mean 8 times 2, which is 16. I mean 8 times 8, which is 64. So that's kind of a confusing thing. The same thing with a square root. When I'm taking the square root, it's usually an imaginary number here. We don't actually put the 2 like the phone has. Okay, if it's a cube root or something like that, there'll be a 3 here, or a 5, or a 10th root would be a 10. But when it's a square root, they won't put anything. And then this, if we took the square root of x, they're asking what number times itself gives you the x. So the first thing you kind of need to start to recognize is some of your perfect squares. So I've given you this table, and I'm not going to fill it out all the way, but the idea is something like we just talked about. 8, this is 8 squared, which means 8 times 8. Which actually means 64. So then same thing, if we did 12 times 12, okay, that would give me 144. So 12 squared would be 144. So use your calculator, or your phone for that matter, and fill out the rest of that table. And then what we're going to do is use that table as a reference chart. So down here at the bottom, if it gives you these types of things, it says square root symbol means you are looking for a perfect pair of factors, meaning a number times itself that would give you 25. So once you've filled out that table, you can go back up and look. What number times itself gives you 25? Okay, in other words, we know that 5 times 5 gives me 25. That means the square root of 25 is 5. Now, something to keep in mind for Algebra 2, it is actually truthfully positive and negative. If I multiply 5 times 5, I get 25. If I multiply negative 5 times negative 5, I get positive 25. So the square root of 25 could be either one of these numbers. For our circumstances in geometry, the square root is always going to be positive because we're going to be talking about shapes, triangles, parallelograms, things like that. They can't have a negative side length. So let's look at this one, 169. What I want you to do is go back up to your chart up here and see where you got the solution of 169. Good. So it would have been 13 times 13. Therefore, the square root of 169 is positive or negative 13. Again, notice once I take the square root, it's not included in my answer. A lot of us struggle with that, but once we add two numbers together, we don't keep the plus sign. This is just like adding or dividing or subtracting. It's just a mathematical symbol. So what do we do if there's something out front? Well, if you go back up and look at your chart, the square root of 16, we're looking for what number times itself gives you 16. Well, in your chart, you should get 4. So we know that the square root of 16 is 4, but we have this negative in the front. So I'm going to carry it out here. And then the square root of 16 in our case is going to be positive 4, so we would put 4. But the negative sign was already in the front, so we would just leave it there. So solution was 5. Again, my solution was 13. Here, my solution is negative 4. So what about this one? We've got 144, which is 12 times 12. So we know that the square root of 144 is 12. So we leave the 2, and then the answer here is 12. And then we can go ahead and multiply. 2 times 12 is 24. Good. So let's look at the back. We've got a couple of other things that they might do to you. One would be to create division. Well, anytime they give you something like this, you can actually split it. So this is the same thing as saying the square root of 100 divided by the square root of 9. Well, now if you need to, you can go back to your chart. The square root of 100 is 10. The square root of 9 is 3. And then I would divide those in my calculator. 10 divided by 3, it's going to give you some weird decimal. If I math frac, this is the answer. It's not going to reduce. So I'm going to let you try this one on your own. Okay, I will kind of help you out with, I'll do this one, and then you guys can do this one on your own. So again, we're going to leave the negative 2. Remember, that just means multiplied by. And then we're going to split this up. The square root of 1 over the square root of 4. So then there's our negative 2. We have the square root of 1, which is 1. And the square root of 4, which is 2. So now if I multiply these, remember this is just over an imaginary 1, and you multiply straight across. So then I'm going to come underneath here. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. 1 times 2 is 2. So then negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So there's your answer. So you guys can do these two on your own. And it says, but what if everything is not perfect? Which is kind of the reality. Can you guys estimate? It says this lies between two consecutive whole numbers. So if we're looking at our chart, we want to figure out, where does 88 fall? Well, if I kind of look at 88, we have the square root of 81, right, which is at 9. And then up here we have the squared of 10 is 100. So 88 falls somewhere between 9 and 10. And since it's much closer to 81, you could probably even guesstimate that this is, 9.2 or 9.3 or something. Okay? So then 15, we would do 4 squared. Whoa. Sorry, we just lost our footage here. Got the dog whining, the camera falling, all kinds of adventures. Let's see if it'll let me get through these. 15, at the high end, I think of 4 squared, which is 16. So then below that, down here would be 3. Well, 3 squared is 9. So 15 falls somewhere between 9 and 16, so the square root of that would be somewhere between 3 and 4. Again, it's real close to 16, so it's probably something like 3.9. So keeping that in mind and using the chart on the front, see if you guys can finish up on these last 4 on your own.